Hi students, this week in our second module, The Earth, we're learning about weathering and erosion. So last week we learned about different types of landforms, and then this week with weathering and erosion, we learned how some of those landforms are made. Please make sure you're taking your guided notes. The science teachers use them in order to make your study guides for module exams, and you can use them for tests and quizzes. So first we need to look at what is weathering and what is erosion. So weathering is something that will break down rock and sediment into smaller pieces. And then erosion is the way that those smaller pieces are moved around. And we usually like to call those smaller pieces sediment. And one type of erosion is called deposition. And that's when the erosion deposits or lays down the sediment and it ends up changing the shape of the land. So when you scroll down a little bit, you'll be able to see kind of how that weathering and erosion and deposition all play into each other for a type of a cycle. So there are different types of weathering. There are physical weathering and chemical weathering. So physical weathering is where the rock is physically broken down into smaller pieces, whereas chemical weathering is where the type of rock is broken down through chemical changes. So let's look at a couple of those. So with physical weathering, we have something called abrasion. And abrasion happens when wind repeatedly breaks down a surface. It can also happen to sand. And finally, abrasion can also form when two rocks rub together. So this is a type of a contact force if we tie it back into last module. There's also animal activity. So when animals get down into the ground and make their habitats, they loosen the rock and the soil, and it causes different types of changes in the landscape. Also, when humans, because we're technically an animal, so when humans go in and we farm and we mine, we're also disrupting the natural habitats. Frost wedging takes place in really, really cold places. So that's when the water gets down in between rocks and it freezes and thaws, which can move apart the rocks over time. And finally, there's also plant growth, which works very similarly to that animal activity. And as plants grow, they are able to crack the rocks and the soil below. So these are all types of physical weathering, which is also sometimes called mechanical weathering. And even though these rocks are physically changing, the chemical makeup or the compound within these rocks are staying the same. This brings us to chemical weathering, where again, the composition of those rocks are going to be changing. So the first one that we're going to look at is acid rain. So when we are on Earth and we're burning these different types of fossil fuels for energy, the acids like sulfur, carbon, and nitrogen are going to get trapped up in the atmosphere. And then they start to mix with the water vapor, and it will create acid rain once the water cycle is complete. And this causes the rocks to weather more quickly than normal. Carbon dioxide, so that's what we breathe out. And it will dissolve in water and it creates carbonic acid. And this acid can wear down rocks, especially limestone and marble. So oxygen, what we breathe in, can mix with iron and create rust. And this is called oxidation. And it can be very, very destructive. And finally, water. So water contains chemicals like oxygen and carbon dioxide. If you guys know the chemical makeup of water, H2O. And it can get into different cracks in rocks, and these chemicals can dissolve the rock. So with each of these 4 things, again, the chemical composition of the rock is changing. It is going to be important that you guys kind of go through here and have these examples in your notes, because examples are going to be the majority of what we see this week in our quiz. So here are some special types of chemical and physical weathering that have gone on to make different types of landforms. So we have this wave rock in Australia. We have caverns, which this particular cavern is being shown in Florida, but for example, Virginia has a lot of caverns. These arches are in the national parks in Utah. And these hoodoos are in Bryce National Canyon Park, which is also out west. So here is a misconception, and a misconception happens sometimes when people get a little bit confused. So a lot of people think weathering and erosion are the same thing, but do you remember the difference and where deposition fits in? So let's review this. Weathering breaks down rocks. Erosion will move the rocks. And then deposition happens when those rocks settle in a new place. So having the difference between these 3 is going to be important moving forward and also on the quiz. So this is going to be really important that you guys have in your notes. So at the end of the assignment, it's always good for you guys to go to the Talk Like a Scientist, because it gives you all of the vocabulary words that we had in our lesson. And make sure that you have those in your notes. Excuse me. Once you are ready, you're going to go ahead and take your quiz. You get 2 tries on this quiz, and it's very important that you wait for your instructor to get to your quiz before you take the second one so that you can get some feedback. Good luck this week, guys.